Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Bigfoot Podcast Show with Tim and Dana.
How you guys doing? We are so happy and just thankful for each and every one of you. We're just happy to be here, sharing some really cool stories, some cool guests. Hopefully we're doing some education while we're doing it. So we're just thank you all again for being here. So we got a fun and exciting guest tonight,
I
right?
know. I'm so excited. We've been wanting to have her on for like almost a year now. Yeah. We met her back in, was it 2 years ago?
It may have been a year. It's possible, but
okay. But yeah, but it's about time that we have her on the show. And so we're going to introduce you to Ontario Richardson.
Let's bring her in the studio.
Hey guys.
Hey, Ontario.
How are you?
Good. Thank you.
Good. It's so great to have you on the show. So first and foremost, I have to ask you how you got your first name, Ontario.
Yeah, my parents would go up to Lake Ontario in Canada quite a bit, well before me, and would do fly-in fishing trips in some remote lakes. And eventually they got that name, and here I am.
There you go.
Are you the first, or do you have siblings?
I'm the only.
Oh,
wow. Okay.
So you didn't have other siblings that had other,
I was going to say I'm the only from
places.
Yeah.
That's so
we love
cool.
it, though. I know you get asked that quite a bit. So
Ontario, tell everybody what got you interested in the topic of Bigfoot, because I know you also have a history of other paranormal interests as well. So why don't you just give us like a little summary of who you are and what you do in the paranormal and Bigfoot world?
Yeah, so I probably well before the Bigfoot stuff. I mean, I've always been really interested in, the cryptid thing, the ghost thing. I grew up watching the black and white Addams families and the Munsters and everything. And the ghost thing, I had a couple different encounters over the years, and I had always also kind of had Bigfoot in my mind, and, was thinking, well, there can't just be one of these things wandering around Washington State, So, yeah. And so I started kind of just looking into it more, listening to podcasts, following people on Twitter. From there, I found Finding Bigfoot, I think, considerably later than most people did. I think I first started watching it in maybe 2021. So yeah, not that long ago. But from there, I was following Cliff and Bobo's podcast, which is great, and found Dr. Russ Jones on Twitter, and he really helped, what I say, is push me off the Bigfoot cliff into actually getting out and doing these things. And we've become great friends over the years from that.
That's cool. That's super cool.
Yeah.
So that's what got you into Bigfoot, really. And so now you are a researcher for the big field research organization.
Good
yeah. So I went on my first BFRO trip in March of 23, I think, in the Iowa one with Bob Barheit as the expedition leader. And, before that, I had been doing quite a bit of stuff just out on my own and whatnot. And I had told Bob I was interested, and he invited me in, and I got hooked up doing that. So I do all the BFRO reports for Iowa. I also help out a considerable amount with Minnesota, Indiana has been pretty busy, Wisconsin. I help with Idaho, Maine, and some of the Canadian provinces also, just to fill in the gaps where there aren't many investigators, because we don't want to lose a good report and have it just sitting in the abyss.
I've got a ton of questions.
And that's a big area too. Go ahead, Henry.
So for the audience, tell them what a BFRO expedition's like, what it meant to you. We've been on one, but
yeah, I love them. I went on my first one and I didn't know anybody there at all, which is a big step for me. I'm a pretty introverted person. But I pushed myself. I was turning 30 that year, and I said, I'm going to do something, I would normally do. So, you all usually show up on a Thursday, and there's an expedition leader and usually probably 3 or 4 other BFRO people who work with them. And you do, you spend your nights, the evenings and nights, kind of meeting up with people, and then you split into groups and go on a night investigation, different places in, the park or state forest that have had activity. And then, the next day you wake up, you kind of regroup with everybody and you just, hang out. And it's, I made so many friends through the BFRO expeditions that people I would have never met before. And I try to get everybody to go to them. So I can't recommend them enough.
Because you're basically popping a tent and you're with a bunch of strangers if you've never met anyone before.
Yeah. And, and the nice thing is during the day, people wonder what they can do. You can go off on your own and hike. I usually like going on hikes or checking out areas that we might have had activity the night before to look for any corroborating evidence. You can also go fishing. There's a lot of different stuff you can do.
You could take a nap.
You can take a nap. Yes.
Yeah, because you're going to be like doing your night expeditions, probably coming back like around midnight. And then it's like everybody's up at the crack of dawn. I was like, oh my gosh, I can't. I need like 8 hours.
So what didn't you expect? Were you prepared when you showed up? Just want to try to help get people ready for these.
Yeah, I guess I didn't expect as much stuff to happen as it did, at least on that first one, which is, isn't something that happens every single time. I know there's people who've been on a ton of these things and nothing happens. It's just really dependent on the animals. But yeah, I was surprised that when, the activity that I was hearing about, on the shows and the podcast and whatnot actually happened. And it really kind of solidifies it, for you if there's anything lacking in, what you think these things are.
So tell us about your experiences there on your expedition.
Yeah. So one of the nights in the first one I went to, the Iowa one, we were walking down a trail. It was me and Bob Barheit, the leader. And then I think we had 2 other guys with us. And we had seen, a red eye glow, these 2, red balls, the size of golf balls. And then that night too, I had recorded whoops. The night after that, it was kind of funny. It's just, it wasn't the area that we were planning on going. We're looking for somewhere else. But Bob was getting flustered. He pulled into the wrong trail drive. And he just kind of, whipped in and whipped out. And then we had a truck with other investigators behind us who had their windows down and we had ours up. Well, as soon as we turned around to pull out, there was 2 really loud knocks that they got recorded as soon as we pulled out of the drive. That was probably the most noteworthy thing on that trip. In the Minnesota one, about a month later, that one we casted probably the best footprint I've ever found. Another night we had split off. There's 4 of us, which is something we like to do, take the groups and make them smaller and kind of go different directions. So 2 of our groups had gone down the paved road. And then me and another guy had gone down like a sand trail kind of off into the woods. And we were doing knocks, and we did a knock on a tree, and then we got a response to our right, pretty off trail. And then we knocked again, and we got another response ahead of us on the trail, which was really neat.
Yeah, that is.
Have you ever been like freaked out or worried when you're out? Because it's dark. I mean, we've when you're out there.
Yeah.
That night, yeah. I should say, especially the first trip, I was a little unsure of all the sounds at night, and whatnot, just getting used to being out there. But in Minnesota too, I think one of the things that was making me the most nervous was the bears. And I didn't have a thermal at that point because we were having a lot of bear activity in that park also. And, you find the footprints all over the place. And
that is scary.
And yeah, we had seen earlier that day a mom with a couple of cubs, and I just didn't want to run into her in the middle of the night.
Yeah, it's like a landmine. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah. It's like sometimes
you
it's not
want
the
to
Bigfoot or the
you want to
scariest
step
thing.
on it.
It's
It's
the other
sleeping
animals. Yeah.
mama bear.
Mhm.
Yeah. Yeah, I can totally. Yeah, I can remember, the expedition that we did last year, which was awesome, was
Mhm.
also my first camping experience. So that
Oh,
was it. But you know what? At the end of it, I loved it, and now I'm obsessed
mhm.
with camping, and I love it. But
Yeah.
yeah, the night hikes were like, okay,
You have
this
to
is
get
like
used to it. It's not,
you do, but at first you're like, okay, you're gonna leave me and her here as bait while you guys go walk away
yeah, yeah,
far,
that's
far
something
away.
we'll do too on those trips. Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, girl, we're going to
Mhm.
get to know each other. But we had a good time. I
Yeah.
actually picked up what I thought was movement and eye shine behind her. We didn't have thermals. Did we even have flashlights?
We did, but
Did
we
we
weren't using.
didn't. I
Oh, I
mean,
don't
we
think
had
you did. Yeah.
nothing.
Yeah.
So when they got back, did they pick up they were deer that I was seeing.
Mm,
So but yeah, your eyes adjust and your ears
yeah.
adjust, and it's almost like you become like a part of the whole thing again.
Mhm. Your
Like back when
senses
we
pick
were
up.
like
Yeah.
wild and running around in the woods, it
Mhm.
was pretty
I
cool.
I got a thermal this year, so I'm excited. And I'm going back to that same park in Minnesota on the BFRO trip in
So you
June.
wait, so you got oh my gosh, she got her own
Yeah.
thermal. You go,
Got my own
girl.
thermal. Yeah, which
That
makes a
is
big difference at night. And that night we probably could have kept going. I just didn't want to run into a bear in the dark. And with the thermal, we can see what's around us to kind of
So,
eliminate
so
that.
how you're looking at this thermal? How did you decide? Okay, I just saw what we think is a Bigfoot.
I don't know. I mean, I like to think I'd snap a pictures or start the video recording. But I'm sure I underestimate what the adrenaline of the situation. Not having not been in a position of ever seeing one before.
but so where are you going back to again with your thermal?
Minnesota.
To Minnesota. So, like, what is it that, because I've never been to Minnesota, give me an idea of how different that terrain is compared to where, maybe people from Ohio or more even where I am living, like on the
It's a
East
lot
Coast.
more north woodsy.
Okay.
You start having a lot of the bears, moose. You'll get wolves up in the northern part. It's
Mm,
pretty forested, lots and lots of lakes and streams.
wow.
So it's a really conducive environment for Bigfoot.
And then usually the places that you guys go out there, do you have like some particular spots that you like to go to?
Yeah, so we have once you join, pay your dues to go on the trip, you usually invited into like a Facebook group or
Mhm.
uh, like the Slack app channel, and then
Mhm.
the investigator who's leading it will have a set state forest or national forest or state park, where you're all going, and they will have already done a lot of homework and having visited these places several times before to figure out what areas are good, figure out where the activity is, and then we'll split maybe a group of 25 or 30 people on the high end into a 5 or 6 small subgroups, and then each person will go with each group will go with an investigator and research a different area in the park, and then kind of come back together at night.
So here's a quick question for you, Ontario. How much, like, would you like? I mean, it seems like this is obviously something new, and it's becoming like very, very like important to you, and you're researching and spending a lot of time. How is it like researching your area that you live in? Like, do you guys have?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So back when I had started this, and Russ and he was helping me look at different areas around me. One of the biggest things, and I think Cliff says it, Matt says it, everybody says it, is find an area close to you that
Mhm.
you can go to frequently and really learn. And so that's what we were trying to do. And we had picked one park, which coincidentally was probably 2 miles from my house at the time. And he'd looked at some maps and, check out these 3 X's, see what you think. Because I just at that time I didn't know, what to look for topographically or whatnot. And so one day I picked one of those X's, and I think it was in February. It was pretty snowy yet, and walked back in there off trail. And when I was walking up, I was just stopped to kind of listen to the birds and just see, what else was around me. And I had heard, what sounded like a Louisville slugger on a tree to my right. And then shortly after, another one on my left. And at that point, I'm like, oh my gosh, like this can't, actually be happening. And so I heard that. And then I pushed on, and I had picked that day because the snow had kind of started to melt. So there were a lot of muddy spots. And I thought, it might be a good day to find a track or something like that. So I had walked back into this valley by a stream and found what looked like a footprint with 5, what would be toes pushed into the hill and, down on the ground. And then, maybe 5 feet away from that was another like half track that looked like it was about to go over top of a log. So I casted that.
Wow.
Yeah. And while I was casting that, Russ was on the phone just walking me through how to do it and mix all the like batter and whatnot. And something either fell or got pushed down to my right. And, at that time I didn't have anything to record anything with. I had like a pound of plaster, and that was about it. But that same park, so I worked that park really hard back then. I was there, 3-4 days a week. And since then, I'd say about a year or two ago, I found what seems to be a handprint on the side of a road. Where it goes. So there's a big river. It's called the Wapsie River. It's a tributary of the Mississippi, which, in my opinion, all the activity that does happen in Iowa is always centered around the Mississippi or some of the main tributaries. So that area of the park was the only spot that was low enough to access the river. And so it's really flat, and then it banks up really high up to where there's a service road. And I had just, I had slid down a hill, and I was just kind of making my way through the leaves and whatnot, and saw a couple holes pushed in the side of the embankment under the road. And so I was pushing the leaves away, and there were 5 holes, and what looked like this part of the hand had pushed down really heavy in the earth. So I have casted that too and sent that to a bunch of people. I mean, how do you know if you don't see the animal make it? But most people thought it, there was a good chance it could have been a handprint.
Were there any other imprints or indentations near there that made you like knees or feet or anything else?
No, the leaves are so heavy in our forests too, which is the types of trees we have, that it's quite a bit of cushion. I think if anything like there, I looked for a second hand, but I couldn't find one.
Okay.
But that would make sense going up a bank.
It would.
So
yeah, like it was, kind of like hunkered down or something.
Yeah.
Which I know Cliff, because that was the year I feel like he just really started talking on his podcast about finding handprints on the sides of the road. And that's, and because he had been talking about that so frequently, that's what triggered something in my mind when I saw those little holes in the ground, and I started pushing the leaves away.
That is cool.
That is amazing. So you're also then investigating, would you say like face-to-face investigating? What places have you been to do some of that? Like investigating reports.
Yeah, we haven't had any like local ones recently in Iowa where I've been able to do face-to-face stuff since I started. But when I joined, there was quite a big backlog of reports, especially for Iowa, that, some were 10 years old that just hadn't hadn't been touched. And so I was,
Right.
cold calling these people who had submitted reports, forever ago. So I haven't done any face-to-face ones, but I've gotten, I think, quite a few really good ones that have been made its way onto the BFRO reports page.
I remember you mentioning, and you can share, or you may even have another one you want to share, a report that was really, really, really old, with a woman that saw something. Yeah.
In Iowa. Yep. I know who.
You want to share that?
Yeah, I can tell that story. So she was one of the ones that had submitted this forever ago. She was very elderly. She was very confused at first why I was calling her. But once, and I try not to prompt people too much because I want them to, speak honestly so I can compare what they wrote versus what they're telling me now. But, I said, you saw something, you said you saw or heard something in the 50s at a Girl Scout camp. And she just came to and knew exactly what I was talking about. And that one was a two-parter because she had an experience too, once we had gotten talking, that she didn't publish. And in my experience, sometimes those are the best ones. But the original one, which is on the Iowa page for reports on the BFRO, is she was a camp counselor, and I think the girls.
I'm sorry, Ontario. What year was this?
This was in the 50s.
In the 50s. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, this was in the 50s. Yeah,
Not
so she was.
50s,
Go ahead, sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No. So when she had first gotten there, her and a couple of the other leaders had seen a large silhouette back by like a crafts barn or something like that, which kind of started off like a weird series of events. A couple of days later, while they were all bunked down in tents, every single night they were hearing something really heavy walking through where all the tents where the Girl Scouts were. And she said she was like holding on to a bat and a rosary because she didn't know what was going on. And a couple of days later, once the girls had left, it was just her and the other counselors, and they started hearing these really like weird, scary whoops, sounds on the forest, broken trees. And they had called the sheriff in almost every night. They're like, somebody is out here, something's going on. And then one night they were out with the deputies, and like a 6-inch thick tree limb got yanked down off a tree. And there was some audio going on, if I remember right, as well, enough to where the deputies decided that they didn't have any interest in going back down into the woods to figure out where this thing was.
Wow.
Or what it was. Yeah. So then that same woman, I think a couple summers later, was driving with her mom and her dad on the way back from visiting like her grandfather in a car late at night, by Delhi, Iowa, if anybody local is listening. And they were on a dirt road, and dad was driving, mom was in the front seat, and she was in the back. And she hears her dad say, "What is that?" And she looks up, and just in an instant, and the headlights see this skinny thing with long red hair run across the road, put its hand on the guardrail, and throw itself down into a creek.
Wow.
And run off. Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah.
So we were recently talking about roadside crossings, and I think sometimes people take them for granted. But when you have headlights, it's just like daytime.
Yeah.
A roadside crossing is very important.
It's probably those are probably one of the best sightings because of that fact.
I think what you see at that point.
And it's crossing the road. There's no trees there, anything, that they can hide away from. You have a clear view, lights on them. So that's pretty cool.
So she had these experiences in the 50s.
Yeah.
And when did she report it to the BFRO?
Like 2010 or something. Probably 10 years ago.
So she held on to that for a long time.
Yeah, for so long. And if I remember right, maybe she told a grandchild or something, but she herself posted it to the BFRO page.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
That is cool.
So then you're also able to interview people who live in other states too, as well. which is pretty
Yep.
cool.
Yeah, I was working with a family in Indiana for a while, back in the fall of 2023, who he had one night, had his German shepherds out on the deck. They lived in a really rural place in southern Indiana, maybe a couple miles from Kentucky, and had heard some really weird audio and caught it on his iPhone. And it was hard to discern, but you could, if you really knew what you were listening for, you could hear. It was kind of like the Ohio sounds in the background. And the dogs were really worked up. And I talked with him extensively about it. I talked with his wife, and I decided to send them one of my personal recorders to put out down by their property. They had a lake, or pond or a lake down there. And I said, I set it up for you to, do timed recordings at night. It'll kick on in the evening. Just hang it out in a tree. We'll see what we get. Because there was something going on there. Because he had also was deer hunting. I'm sorry. He was deer hunting that earlier that day, before he had heard the sounds at night. And they had shot a couple deer and had gotten knocks too. Yeah. So fast forward, I had sent him my recorder, and I said, let it go for a week, in the evening, send it back to me. I'll look through the audio. And he did. He sent it back, and one of the first nights it was out there, we got one of the most defined whoops that I've ever heard. And there was was no question about it. And I had sent that to Monongahela, which I think some people know. You guys probably know who he is. He does a lot of sound work out on the East Coast for Bigfooters. And I had sent it to him, and I said, I think this is a whoop. And he said, undoubtedly. And he was able to use his own, skills from his professional career to really look into the spectrogram, the shapes of the sounds, and was able to find knocks before it, to where something was answering it, and it was answering something else.
I think a lot of people forget about the importance of audio, and how it can be measured, and you can see, like, some things make the waves go a certain way, and some sounds make them go another way. So it's just like almost another form of evidence that shows you that this is something that's making this noise, and we don't know what it is, basically. Exactly. It's not any known animal. It's not a person doing it. It's,
And when you add that with the other things that happen, so sometimes a whoop or a knock may not convince people, and sometimes they never do. But when you add it with everything else that happened, you're putting together like a story, not a story, but facts in that. So it's pretty cool, impressive.
Seeing is believing, but we have 4 other senses. Do you know? We have 4 other senses that are important.
So speaking of that, have you ever smelled anything weird when you were out there in the woods, that you thought might be related to this?
Yeah. I don't know if it was Bigfoot or not, or, other investigators who haven't showered for 3 days, but
we've been there. We've been Brad or something,
Stop.
Not really. I don't think anything that I'd really largely attribute to that. I know people have talked about it, but it's not something I've experienced.
Yeah, you seem like and I like your style on Terry. You seem very matter of fact. Like, this is what I'm doing. This is what I've seen, I've heard, I've whatever. And that's that, So, you've never seen one, but it doesn't matter, because, it just doesn't matter.
I've had enough experiences in other ways.
Exactly. I've had 0 experiences. And have we? I don't think we personally have. No. So
that's the reality of it, though. And that's what people don't understand when they get into this is, 99% of the time, nothing happens. These different encounters I've had have all happened over, 5 years. And there's a lot more days where nothing happened than there is days where things happened.
And you've spent a lot of time outside, which is really what we could spend a lot of time outside where we live, but there's just no Bigfoots here where we live. So it's okay. But if you live in a place where you can actually, which is in a lot of places,
Well, let's talk about that. So what do most people feel in the Bigfoot investigation world? what do you need to, to have, a potential habitat of, of family or, of Bigfoot? If environmentally, what do you need?
Yeah, I think, water, a good source of water, multiple sources is good. Prey animals is important. The one thing in Iowa, and a lot of people knock on Iowa as not, not being a good spot. And, probably 3/4 of the state isn't, but part of it, when you get close to the Mississippi, there's a lot more life. There's the hills, the bluffs that you hear constantly, reports. There's so much deer, foods, other food sources, consistently across reports, you'll hear, cornfields, berries, a lot of gardens. When I hear reports from other people that I work with at the BFRO, who have these things near their house, the one consistent is they either have a garden that they throw, leftover scraps and, rotted fruit over the, the edge of the fence, or they have animals like chickens or ducks, that these things can use as an, a good opportunity for an easier meal. So I'd say as long as you, a big stretch of woods nearby, water and food are the three main things. And, I guess luck at that point. So I don't think, at least with Iowa, I don't think that they're here necessarily all year round. I think it's seasonal, just because we don't have the vast swatches of woods, at least near my house, that they would need all the time, but once you get into the winter, which is most of the time, most of my stuff here has happened. No, nobody's in the woods because it gets so uninhabitable.
Do you have cave systems out there?
Yeah. Yeah. There's as closer you get to Mississippi, there's a lot of limestone bluffs and caves, and they're, Maquoketa is a pretty famous park in eastern Iowa, and they have, a lot of caves. We have mountain lions, we have black bears sometimes, we have the snakes, it gets pretty rough on the, the eastern side.
So what do you take with you out in the woods then when you're out there? Just you can protect yourself from anything, snakes, mountain lions.
Yeah.
Sprained ankles.
When it's warmer, yeah. When it's warmer, I'll, depending if I'm going off trail or, kind of up by some of the bluffier areas, I'll wear snake boots just because I don't want to get bit. We don't have a ton of rattlesnakes, but they're there. Water moccasins too. It's everybody's, own belief, but I personally carry a pistol with me when I go, just because, I'm a female, out in the woods by myself. I don't know if a coyote could come at you, or, I found homeless encampments, pushed far back in the woods before. So I carry that, a notebook and pen, usually like a pound of plaster, just some, light medical stuff.
And you're out there by yourself.
Yeah, I do all my stuff by myself if I'm not on a BFRO trip.
Wow, good for you. I've even seen like pictures of you with the baby walking.
Yeah, we go out. I don't do quite the off trail stuff with her.
Still, you got her out there. That's totally cool. I love it.
We were out yesterday, out in the woods together, enjoying the weather, and
that's amazing.
That's
starting to turn green, so couldn't pass up the opportunity.
How is the temperature right now where you are?
Really up and down. So on the cold ends, it's been 40 degrees lately. Yesterday it was 70. We're just in that weird Iowa.
We're doing the same thing
where it's just up and down, But I'm very ready for it to even out. I remember last year when I was at the Ohio conference, that was, it was 80 degrees while we were there. And I think it was warm in Iowa when we came back there on out. So I just have that as a mark in my mind of hopefully it's just got to make it that far.
That was a rare thing, I think, for the Ohio. It's always been like freezing cold, like had. And
it was weird last year.
It was nice.
Which we enjoyed. So
it was, it was absolutely nice. So you're going to be going to Ohio, the Ohio Bigfoot Conference this year. That's exciting. We're unfortunately not going to make it. What's the lineup there?
So it's Renee. Renee's going to be there. Dr. Jeff,
Right.
Cliff, Shelley Covington, Montana.
Mm-hmm.
Our friend Esteban's going to be the MC.
Yay!
And I'm missing somebody, I think. Of course, so you guys, all you amazing people there.
I'm excited I'm hoping to meet Shelley and talk with her a little bit. I know on some of the podcasts that she's been on, she talks a lot about being a mom and then balancing Bigfoot stuff also, which is a tough thing to navigate.
Yeah, well, most new moms are just trying to navigate normal life.
Yeah, I'm just trying to survive most days and get out of the house a couple times a week.
Yeah, so you're just like, how do I still do Bigfoot? Girl, you can still do it. You can, you know, it's obviously not, you might not be able to spend much time, but I don't know.
I remember talking to Diane Stocking about that when she was her kids were younger, and she would, I mean, not babies probably, but they would be going with her out in the woods. So
yeah. I figure we had a shortage of female Bigfooters, so we might as well indoctrinate the one I got.
Let's talk about that. Why do you think that is?
I don't know. I just don't think there might be that many women who are, you know, out interested in the woods and doing things outdoors, and you know what's already a very niche group of people. I think, you know, and I've heard it here and there in podcasts of the paranormal stuff is I think a lot of the women tend to pick on each other, you know, and they're not always as nice.
I see that with the big
people nice to the women, at least in the paranormal stuff.
Oh, okay.
But I don't know. I just think it's already a very small group of people and who are actually out there, you know, doing these things. It'd be great if there was more.
Yeah, it could be what you two said before, just being a mom. Sometimes it's hard to just make time for it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep. It's a lot.
But yeah, we do wish there were more women and just
I think for the most part Ontario's right. It's not common to find women who like to be outside.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, you know, there's expeditions where we're, you know, covered in bug bites and covered in dirt. You know, and it's just
but it teaches you, you know, when the hot water heater breaks in the house, you're like, oh, it's okay. I don't need hot water. I got a shower and cold water. That's better than nothing. So I think camping teaches you a lot, and being outside and appreciating nature. But yeah, I think that's the biggest reason. We need more women outside doing, because basically you're going to be a Bigfooter. But it's also cool if while you're Bigfooting, you're doing something else that you like to do too. I think, you know, like bird watching or just hiking in general, or, you know, identifying plants. I think you're always going to be picking up another hobby or so while you're out there. So I think people forget of how fun it is to be outside.
And I do think too with, you know, my daughter, the age she is now, she's really getting vocal and making sounds. And you know, if there was something in that area, you know, it could draw something in. You hear, you know, sounds of these things mimicking and making baby sounds. And, you know, if there was a female Bigfoot around, you know, it could be, baby bait. No. But, you know, curiosity, I think they're pretty curious creatures, and it could really draw something in.
So do you think that like females and children, that a Bigfoot would be more curious about us because we're not,
you know, than a you know, a large man.
Yeah, we're less threatening.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and we're just prettier than you guys.
You are. Yeah, right.
You're very pretty.
Thank you.
But so anyway, so let's talk about this other thing that we just recently saw in the past couple of months. I saw it on YouTube, and this was something that you were involved with as well. Yep. It was a report that came from Maine that you were able to interview and kind of handle everything in an interview on the phone. And then there was this video that you also. So I'm gonna let you tell
us the backstory.
Shut up, Dina.
Yeah. So like I was talking about earlier in the podcast is I help out with a lot of states that aren't in Iowa or the Midwest. And one of those is Maine, just because there's not a lot of investigators there. And I had seen a report pop up claiming footprints. This guy had said, he owned, I can't remember, it was 30 acres of hemlock forest. And they had just recently built there, but he had, been walking on the property, hunting on it for a long time. And said that he was out, during a snowstorm and had taken a video of some footprints that he was very unsure of. And we get a lot of those, and 99% of them, I'll always ask, if someone says they have a picture or video of something, what it sees, and almost always it's some random mark in the ground, it's nothing. But this time it looked like something. And it was a video of about 150 yards of very big footprints in a very tight line, walking under the tree branches. And once I saw that, I got on the phone with him pretty quick, and we had talked about it pretty extensively. So that area, there's a lot of cornfields, a lot of gardens, so a lot of other food sources. This thing, whatever it was walking through a bunch of different deer beds and making strides that were about 7 or 8 feet long.
7 or 8 feet long.
From foot to foot, and that's, that was his estimation. He said it was about 2 of his strides to make up one of these things. And then as the video slows down, you can see the steps get smaller and smaller, which, we interpreted as, maybe this thing was running through the snow and then started slowing down, maybe to find a deer or whatnot.
So it would make sense that the strides were longer as we're running versus.
Right.
Yeah.
So
you yourself, when you run, you're going to take a lot longer strides than if you were walking.
I'm going to share the video. So for our listening audience, it's not long, so you can bear with us. And maybe if I can do this without screwing it up, I'll do it. So
and maybe we could also post the link.
Yeah, we'll definitely post it at the YouTube link for this as well. And I'm going to add this, and we'll let you guys take a look at it.
Yeah, and so he followed these until they kind of got lost in the snow and he couldn't find them any longer. But there was, if I remember right, from what he was saying, about 12 inches of snow that had really turned to ice and was really hard and compact. And then this storm that was happening while he shot this video had produced 7 or 8 inches additional. And if you look at the prints up close, they have some snow in them, but not a lot, which means it probably came through there pretty recently from when he was there.
Wow, maybe it was actually like walking away from him too.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah. And I think the thing that sticks out to me the most is how far apart each print is. What do you think about that, Ontario?
Yeah, I think it was one of the more convincing factors that this could be something. Also, was how much of, for lack of a better word, in a tightrope it was walking.
Right.
Which is something that's consistent across different reports that are believed to be true.
Right.
But, I didn't see it. He didn't see it. So, I don't want to say, without a doubt is Bigfoot, but.
Right. But then what happens?
A lot of the similarities to other prints that we believe are true.
I think what happens is we start to think, okay, so if it wasn't a Bigfoot, what was it?
Probably some type of ungulate, like maybe a moose or a big deer can sometimes make prints like that. Would probably, in my opinion, it would be the more likely secondary option, which I know. Once this video was put out there and the report was published by Matt, it really took off. There was a woman from the Daily Mail who had reached out to me wanting comments on this. And she'd also reached out to people like Dr. Meldrum, Amy Buey, I think is how she pronounces her last name, and just get differing opinions. Dr. Meldrum thought, it was nothing else than a moose or a big deer. I hold his opinion in great esteem, obviously. But I don't know. I don't know what it was, but it was interesting enough that, it's one of those things that the BFRO thought people should see.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Yeah.
That is amazing.
It's interesting how you can just, you can rule certain things out. So it just kind of starts limiting the playing field. So that's always fun to do.
So here's a question too, is, this is always one of my favorite questions to ask people is, so what do you think Bigfoots are?
Something, a relic hominid, probably some type of ape. I don't, personally think it's anything metaphysical or anything like that. I think there's a place for that. I've had some paranormal experiences that, without a doubt solidify that for me too. But, having experienced both types of things, Bigfoot, activity and paranormal, in my opinion, there's not a overlap between those things. Yeah, I think it's just something flesh and blood. I think there's a lot of land out there. There's more forest now than there has been since World War II. And I think people don't give enough credit to, if something wants to hide, it can.
And how much space that we actually have.
Yeah.
We have a lot of space.
And then, where you are, and even over in Maine, I mean, you can find tracts of forests that connect or are pretty close to each other, so you can get from one area to another without being seen pretty easily.
Green belts, we have them all over eastern Iowa, and that's, in my opinion, at least here locally, that's how they're traveling.
Yeah, that's that. So do you think they're in family? Do you think they might? I mean, we're just all theories and hypothetical. Do you think they're clans or family?
I think that there's probably, different subgroups of females with offspring, spread out. And then there's probably, a large male that, will go meet up with, each of them over time. I don't know if I think that they all live together, like, male, female, children, things like that. But
it might be something similar to the way we live.
Yeah.
Sometimes the dad's there, sometimes the dad's not, sometimes the mom's there, could be like that too.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yep. So then you have Ohio coming up. What other things do you have coming up in the future?
I'll
research.
I'll be in Ohio. I'm starting to get out a little bit more now that my daughter's getting a little older. But I'm also going to be in she's turning 7 months this week.
Wow.
Yeah, which I don't know where that time went at all.
No,
it's
crazy.
They're like 30.
And then I'll be in Minnesota for the BFRO trip in June, which will be my first time away from her.
Okay.
And then I'll also be on the Iowa BFRO trip in late September.
Okay,
Good.
cool.
Well, you're staying busy.
We should do another expedition.
We should.
You should.
Yeah.
But Minnesota's far, right?
Minnesota's far.
How far away is Minnesota?
Far.
Okay.
Yeah, it's far. Yeah, might be too far.
Tim doesn't like to drive very
far. You guys got a ton of good spots up there. Maybe reach out to, I know Alex Petticoff is up there.
I'm going to go, up, like Vermont, Maine. I want to go up that way.
Yeah, a great chance with
Nebraska.
Massachusetts is great.
Yeah.
This Massachusetts guys.
Yeah. We're not far from Massachusetts.
Or we can just go to West Virginia and hang out with Russ and Brad.
Oh, yeah. See, well, that's another cool thing too. And then, we could totally do that, but we'd have to stay in a camper.
Yeah, their tent days are over.
They're not doing it. Brad had a turkey burger in our tent on our expedition, but he wasn't sleeping over. He was just because it was close to his house, but he was in our tent, and I give him like a turkey burger on like a whole wheat bun and like some sauteed zucchini, and he's like, he just didn't know what to do with it. What is this?
That sounds like Brad.
But he ate it, and then he was like,
yeah.
"Wow, this is really good." I'm like, "Yeah,
Brad's awesome.
He is awesome. We had a good.
Yeah.
He was.
I think he'll make there in Ohio also for about a
Yeah,
day.
Brad's usually always there.
It's a
right?
good
Yeah,
group
Russ is
there.
going to
Yeah.
be there. Small Town Monsters is going to be there. That
Yeah.
was the
that's
other
right.
guy we
Seth-
were
yeah,
trying to
Seth
think of.
is
It was
speaking. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. Seth will
Seth.
be there, so that'll be a lot of fun.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
we're
guys
sorry
will
we're
have
gonna
a
miss it.
good,
Yeah.
but maybe I'll convince Tim to go to Minnesota
Yeah.
on the
You
expedition.
should.
That'd be-
It's always, from talking about Bob, and Bob leads a lot of them around here. It's always got the craziest activity.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I just want my camping stuff because I've got myself organized now in a certain way. So we would have to drive. So, but we'll
Yeah.
see. We'll see what happens, girl. But you know what? I have to say, it was great having you
Yes, it was
on.
wonderful.
Like,
Yeah, it was
girl,
great
you were
catching
just
up with you guys.
awesome. I mean,
thank
like, just your experiences and how, I mean, you're just an amazing, like, storyteller
Mhm.
also. So we really appreciate that.
you.
So what do you suggest for people who want to learn more about it or they have an experience? What should they do? What do they do?
Read books, honestly. Probably more than watching YouTube videos. Even one of the first books I read was Dr. Grover Krantz's, I think it's Bigfoot Sasquatch Evidence, if I remember the title of it, which is probably a little deep for, one of my very first experiences with trying to garner that knowledge. But I think reading the books from the greats is a good place to start. Audiobooks if you don't, like to read. I think just from there, just start getting out in the woods, find something else you enjoy doing and then go there to do that. And, if something happens along the way, you didn't waste that time because you're out there already doing something else you enjoy.
Yep, I love that. That's
Mhm.
perfect, Ontario.
Well,
Perfect.
we'll definitely share links to the BFRO if you guys have anything weird that happens that you think might be related to, and then for the video.
Sounds good.
So thank you so much. This was amazing, and we're just
Sure.
glad you joined us tonight.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ontario.
And
Thank you.
we'll just close it out, right?
Yeah.
See you guys later.
All right. See ya.
Sounds good.
Bye bye.